Schools are competing for students, and not just between private and public schools. They're competing for students locally and internationally as well. Superintendents are finding their roles expanding to include marketing and recruitment. Should business management skill be a basic criterion for our educational leaders? If so, what does this mean for our upcoming teachers and administrators, or our current teacher education programs for that matter? What impact does free market influence have on the quality of education and the learning experience? Should this impact the way parents are making their education decisions for their families? I'm Paul Shaker, and this is an Education Matter. Joining me today from SFU are, on the left, Brayne, Adjunct Professor of Education, and on the right, Geoff Madoc-Jones, Coordinator of our Education Leadership Program and Assistant Professor of Education. Welcome.
Oh, thank you.
We want to begin today's discussion about market-driven education by focusing on the K-12 sphere. I'm wondering, Robin, what are some examples of how the market is driving or affecting public education decision-making for K-12 educators?
Well, from my perspective, and with all the options that are now open to parents and students, there's no question in my mind that parents have become much more critical education consumers than they have in the past. I think this is probably aided and abetted by, as I mentioned, there are more options for parents. Legislative changes mean that there is more freedom they have with respect to what schools their children can attend. There's no restrictions anymore on catchment areas or boundaries or school districts. And of course, with the advent of technology in terms of websites and other kinds of things, there is an enormous demand on the part of parents for information about schools, what they offer, what their track record is, what their performance scores are, the variety of programs, and there is more options available to school districts to describe how their individual schools may differ from one another with respect to what they can provide. So marketing is very much becoming a feature, if you like, of the management of school districts, and it's particularly exacerbated by the fact that most school districts in the province now are experiencing a significant decline in student enrollment, which is an impact on their funding. So their ability to recruit and retain students is a significant determiner of how successful they'll be, their viability, literally.
So one factor here is a general decline, at least in some districts, of the student population. I'm wondering if there are other reasons underlying this very fundamental change in the way we structure school populations, not only in BC but all over North America. This isn't the way we did things in the past. Are there other reasons besides a decline in school population why this element of choice is being introduced and markets are being introduced?
Well, I think the element of choice has certainly been introduced by feelings perhaps that parents have that schools have been responsive to particular questions or concerns that they have, that the absence of what might have been historical competition may have created a kind of a complacency or an absence of urgency, if you like, in schools in terms of innovative methods and being more responsive to the educational needs. There may be a generalized angst or concern about the productivity of schools, which translates into worries of how well their children will do in work, the prosperity of the country. So I think there's this general anxiety that schools may be not performing to the extent that all parents would like, and I think choice has been identified as perhaps an instrument that will increase more competition, that will increase responsiveness on the part of schools, that will cause schools to vary their methods and their programs to be more responsive to what parents want for their children.
Well, I think you've outlined implicitly in your remarks some of the pros having to do with market-driven education. But I suppose, too, there are some negative factors involved, and you're probably equally familiar with those. What costs do you see associated with this movement toward market-driven or choice-driven public education?
Well, I think choice in British Columbia at the present time is kind of a zero-sum game, in a sense that that parents selecting particular schools because of what they feel are the strengths or features of a program obviously will be the loss to other schools. And then there's the public policy issue as to what one does with schools, in fact, that are declining in enrollment as a consequence of migration, perhaps, to other schools in the other schools in a school district. That's particularly critical, as I mentioned earlier on, in terms of those school districts that are having a significant decline in enrollment. So there are downsides with respect to how instrumental choice is in fact, improving the level of instruction or kinds of courses that are provided in schools for which students leave to go to other schools. So one's got to sort of drill down and determine what are the reasons why parents would choose to move to another school. Is it dissatisfaction with the programs that are provided in their current school, or is it an attraction to specific types of programs or a specific student composition, for example, in another school?
I remember when choice was introduced in Minnesota, the research showed that the #1 reason parents selected a school with their child was to do with the sports programs. I don't know that that kind of research has been replicated. I have noticed in working in different states before I came to British Columbia that the role of the superintendent differed from state to state in the U.S. depending on what particular demands were put on a superintendent. I wonder if market-driven education is changing the nature of the superintendent's role here in B.C.
Perhaps to a certain extent. My view over the years as superintendent is that the superintendent, as a chief executive officer of a school district, had certain responsibilities to provide all sorts of information about the performance of their schools, to cause parents to be confident and happy with the responsiveness of schools, with the variety of educational programs. So most superintendents that I have been associated with have spent a lot of time marketing their schools basically for reasons of public confidence, as opposed to marketing schools for purposes of attracting a market share, if you like, of students that are eligible to go to schools. I don't have a lot of experience in other jurisdictions in the United States, but my guess is where significant percentages of students enroll in charter schools, such as a Michigan or an Arizona. And given the fact that school districts losing students or schools losing students to charter schools obviously has a significant effect on their viability. Superintendents in those jurisdictions, I suspect, would be very concerned with marketing. It would represent a significant portion of their work.
When I came here, I was impressed at the focus on instruction that the superintendents entertained. I wasn't used to that from my prior experience, where the role of a superintendent might be more to focus on passing levies or containing health care costs. I'm wondering, is that focus on instructional leadership able to be maintained in this current environment?
Yes, I think so, because when you scratch away at the purposes of any kind of educational reform or any kind of educational change, one hopes that it's sort of directed at influencing those factors that affect how much students learn and the rate they learn. And superintendents, I think, can combine marketing strategies, if you like, with the type of instructional leadership that's directed at putting those factors in place that cause students to learn. I mean, achievement is still related to, early learning, is still related to readiness, is still related to the quality of instruction, is still related to what teachers do in classrooms, is still related to levels of parent support, etc. So I don't see marketing your schools as being, in opposition, if you like, to the historical role that superintendents have played and continue to play in terms of uplifting the achievement in their school districts, which I think is the main requirement of their job.
Before I get Geoff involved in this conversation, I wanted to ask one more thing, and that's about caps or controls. What prevents a school district or its leadership from becoming excessively interested in bringing in outside business, of going overseas for students to the detriment perhaps of its own primary mission, which is its own students. Is there any guideline or control set on how much a school district should compete and participate in this kind of transfer of non-residential students into its schools?
No, there are not really any guidelines other than what the capacity of their school district might do. As a matter of fact, the whole notion of opening up schools to international students has sort of highlighted the activities of marketing and competition, if you like, between school districts, and among school districts. But the number of international students that you take in will be dependent upon the capacity that you have. In other words, you can't make the case for expanding a school or expanding the number of seats in a school district. One of the political problems that we faced often with recruiting international students is they would read things like the Fraser Institute rankings, and they would read press coverage of what were exceptional schools, and of course they would want to enroll in those particular schools. And so superintendents are left with sort of balancing the need to bring in international students for purposes of revenue for the school district, and yet making sure there were sufficient seats in a school that was viewed as performing well for students in catchment areas and for students in their school districts.
Stay tuned for more on our discussion about market-driven education.
For more than 40 years, the Faculty of Education at SFU has been delivering academic programs that are innovative and responsive. Based on the academic research of our professors and the expertise of practicing teachers from your communities, our programs are designed to meet classroom needs. As a community, we're piecing together a successful education experience for students today and in the future.
Welcome back to our show. Geoff, after you've heard what Robin had to say about the realities of choice and market-driven education here in the province, I'm wondering, from a point of view of an academic, what are some of the themes that you'd like to reflect on? What are some of the values implicit in public education, for example, that are influenced by this difference in approach?
Well, I think Robin's pointed out some of the real practical difficulties of running a school district or running school systems when you have the pressure of market forces being brought to bear upon your operation. I think that is partly to do with demographics and partly to do with economics, but it's also to do with what you could call philosophy or ideology. And that is, there are people out there who believe that the state should not have a monopoly over education, that in fact it is a good thing for individual choice to be inserted into the mix, not just because of the fact it may save money, but for reasons of principle, that people should in fact be responsible for the education of their children and should take certain kinds of decisions. And if you like, in some sense, it is the conflict between what you could call freedom and equality. Now, when you look at the history of state schooling, states, countries, nations have been really only involved in mass education for about 100, 120 years. And perhaps you might say they're now beginning to get out of it, and in some cases, and allowing the marketplace to become more dominant. Certainly in Europe, there are still large areas of Europe outside of Britain where the notion of the kind of choice that we have in North America or in Britain would be regarded as very deleterious for education. In France, you're educated to become a citizen of the country, and that is of such importance that the state must keep control over what is happening in the early parts of children's lives.
The emphasis on citizenship isn't the one we hear about mostly in the media, is it? It's an economic value that we hear about with respect to education.
Yes, and certainly if you ask parents and if you ask quite often students what is the rationale for them being in school, they will use an economic or an instrumental one. It's to get a better job, it's to get on in the world. And I think that is one of the dangers when you have that kind of a stress on schooling and on universities, that the broader values, the notion of developing as a full human being, of being a full member of society, of being a fuller person, being a better person, is something that perhaps can't be left up to market forces. And in the university in particular, because I do run what is known as a cost recovery program, there are certain kinds of decisions that have to be made as to where market forces should be used, in fact, to finance post-secondary education.
I've been studying a little bit about what the term liberal means, and it has at least two meanings, if not more, mainstream meanings. One, classical liberalism, where a kind of dog-eat-dog competitiveness is welcome. And then the social liberalism that came in toward the end of the 19th century that is more what contemporary educators, I think, base their work on, the notion that we should try to improve access and opportunity and give a leg up to people who don't have built into their previous experience every opportunity to succeed.
Well, of course. I mean, I think that undergraduate education should remain as what you know as liberal education. That is, an education that allows someone to investigate their own, who they are and their values in terms of a conversation with the tradition. Whatever that tradition is, there must be what is known as sometimes a horizon of significance. But I think that what is important to recognize is that once you got out of your undergraduate education and you're faced with what we now call a professional education, that it may be appropriate for individuals, in fact, to pay for a fair amount of that out of their own pockets, because in some sense, over the rest of their lives, they can recover that income.
What do you think is the attitude of students toward paying a premium to take what we call cost recovery programs in post-secondary education?
Well, the history of cost recovery programs in the Faculty of Education at the master's level and at the doctoral level emerged out of a need to what you could call deal with isolated areas in the province. Back during a time when the government had, in fact, a freeze on fees and the funding was being frozen, it was very difficult for us to reach out into various areas of the province and provide our programs. And American providers were coming in and actually teaching hundreds of future principals and teachers with their programs. Universities from San Diego, from Seattle, and from various other places. And Phoenix was very much in operation. So ironically, there, the use of premium fee programs had to do with trying to regain, if you like, control over the way in which professional teachers were in fact being trained and educated at an advanced level.
Well, this takes us in a little different direction than the conversation we were having with Robin, and yet there is a relevant question to ask both of you, which is the evidence of benefit from choice introduced at either one of your levels. Robin, what is the verdict so far, early in the game, but what is the verdict so far on the benefits of introducing choice to the quality of K-12 education?
Well, I think the true test of a choice policy is the extent to which it empowers parents. And the reason parent empowerment is important is because the choice theory is based on the idea that schools will be more responsive to the concerns and the issues of parents. So the research question then, of course, is whether or not greater choice has led to any, significant benefits with respect to lifting the achievement of a school district. Now, as you know, it's very, very difficult to isolate the effects on student achievement of any one social policy. But from my point of view, choice has a couple of positive features. Is that I do believe that it has, where it applies, it does have an uplifting effect on overall student achievement in a school district, insofar as that I do believe that schools become more attentive to the types of programs that make a difference, are more attentive to reporting to parents, are more attentive to amendments to instructional procedures, etc. What worries me about the choice policies, and that's why I introduced it at the outset in terms of the extent to which it empowers parents, it has such a differential effect depending upon on the context. A choice policy can be very powerful in a tight metropolitan area such as Vancouver, because it does enable parents to choose. To date, there's very little evidence that parents select to go from one school district to another school district. But there is some evidence to suggest that it has an effect on parents choosing schools that are outside their catchment areas. More so for elementary schools, I believe, than for secondary schools. The jury is still out as to whether or not providing parents with more options has a significant effect in areas such as in small school districts, or in school districts that have very, very small, isolated, dispersed kinds of schools. So I'm not aware of any evidence that relates choice policies to any particular gains in student achievement, but intuitively it seems to me that when schools are more concerned about what it is and how they teach it, and are more responsive to the effects of evidence about how well they do those things, the more likely it is to be a driver of meaningful educational reform in a school. For example, a commitment to teaching common instructional objectives, a commitment to more transparent reporting or accountability systems, a commitment to greater variety of instructional methods and greater variety of programs. But I think it's most of the evidence on choice comes from the United States. It comes from the charter school literature, in a sense of whether or not the existence of charters in Michigan or Arizona have any effect on student achievement.
And Geoff, the higher education issue that you outlined is a little different. It had to do more with access, I think. But what do you think? So far, is the verdict pro or con, and to what extent, with the introduction of cost recovery programs?
Well, I think from the point of view of the work of the Faculty of Education in these programs over the last 15 odd years, we provided significant choice to Canadian educators who otherwise would have taken their master's degrees and their doctoral degrees at American institutions. And in that sense, the premium fee or the cost recovery programs have played a very important part in developing a cadre of senior officials at schools who are taught by British Columbia University and British Columbia academics.
And looking at it from the point of view of the learner in both cases, how do you get opportunity to talk to students and have a sense of how they see the changed landscape? For example, with our post-secondary cost recovery programs.
Yes, I think that one of the things that we've done is, particularly in certain isolated areas, we've been able to develop people who previously were not actually could not get into university, maybe non-traditional students, for example, as we call them. But what's happening now, of course, is with the development of university colleges and other institutions throughout the province, the role of SFU is changing, perhaps, from perhaps a province-wide provider of services to looking at more niche provision. Certainly, I think that the feedback we have from students is that the programs are worth the price, because it brings them access and it brings them a BC and a Canadian degree, which they're very proud to take.
Well, how should the price be set? Should it be whatever the market will bear, for example?
Well, that's a very good one about how does one actually price a thing like a master's degree or a doctoral degree. I think one does it comparatively. I will say the existence of the American providers does provide us with competition. We're not dealing with a monopoly situation. We have to keep those things in mind. And you have to take into account also the earnings that people accrue from taking these degrees. Teachers, for example, when they get a master's degree, do earn a certain amount of money. So it takes a lot of knowledge and a certain amount, if you like, of just good sense.
We'll be back in a moment.
You know, there's a lot of conversation today that we need to keep an open dialogue continually with our teenagers, which I totally endorse. But one of the things I really want us to think about is, what does it mean to deeply listen to our teenagers? And we can only do that if we deeply listen to ourselves. And in particular, where is it that they find joy? And where is it that we find joy? And this is different than happiness. But joy is what animates us, our mind, body, spirit, and how we are enlivened in this world. And that may be in many forms, and it may not be because they get the best mark or because they're involved in the right sports or the right arts. But what qualities allow them to experience this? If we can just get a sense of that, we might get a sense of what their passion is. And if we understand what their passion is, and if they know that, they can get in touch with that, which really resides deep in their body and their heart. They might have a small clue of what they actually are meant to be, what they're called to do on this planet, what they're called to do in this life.
Anxiety. We seem to be swimming in the sea of anxiety everywhere. I witnessed that in my own classroom. I witnessed that in my own self as a parent of 2 children. Now they are grown-ups, but I've had my many moments of anxiety. And what's really tricky about anxiety is that it is communicable. So when parents are anxious, their children get anxious, and that interferes with their proper development. They don't enjoy life when they're anxious. They begin to fret, and they experience a lot of stress. So one thing I like to say really is that parents need to deal with their own anxiety and do not project that onto their children.
Some say market-driven education has been introduced to British Columbia to improve the quality of our public schools. Others say because there's been a general disinvestment in the schools due to declining enrollments. In either case, this trend is with us and needs to be monitored so that it stays in balance with respect to the mission of our public schools. For example, are the schools primarily committed to economic purposes, or is citizenship the driver behind public education? On the other hand, it might be that self-realization or the development of students should be the primary theme that our public schools are engaged with. In any case, a balance needs to be struck as we develop these market-driven solutions to our problems. At the post-secondary level, we see cost recovery programs adding access and opportunity at a reasonable cost for our university students and postgraduate students. This trend seems to use the resources of the province in a very beneficial way, given the demands that exist among our population. Somewhere in this, there's a balance between markets and government, another word for government, of course, being community. Thanks for watching Your Education Matters. I'm Paul Shaker.
We welcome your comments, questions, feedback, and suggestions for show topics. Contact us via email at yem@sfu.ca or by phone at 778-782-8517. The views and opinions presented in this program are not necessarily those of SFU or its faculties, staff, or administration.